talk to you about it. Okay, let's see if it's ready to go. Leave meeting. Why are they? They throw in new things. Now we have a new window that doesn't look like any I've ever used before. Leave meeting. And I don't know why they keep changing things, because I am a creature of habit. I'm okay once I've got a habit. So, but anyway, I think we're okay now. Let's see. It says we're recording. Okay, and we're live. Okay. So here we go. Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today I'm going to have a lot of fun. I am going to talk to somebody about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm very surprised, because I thought I was kind of worried about this conversation, because I thought I don't know anything about this subject. And then I looked her up and I found out this is exactly what I think I'd love to talk about. So this is Heidi Pearson, who's a professor of marine biology at the University of Alaska Southeast, which is in Juneau, Alaska. And she is an expert on whales and dolphins and the interaction of primates with those creatures, whales and dolphins and other marine, smart marine critters. So I think the interesting thing is comparing the smartness, the intelligence of primates, and I have a case I want to bring up with her, with the intelligence of dolphins and whales and such critters. We'll get to that later, but the real scheduled plan was today for us to talk about whales and how they do us a huge favor and how we need more of them again, because we've done away with so many over the years, and they turn out to be important for our climate change issues. So let's go to Juneau and say hi to Heidi. Hello.
Hi, Meta. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you're here. Okay, now you're an expert, and I looked up some of the stuff that you've been doing research on, and it's so interesting. First of all, I know some of the answers to this part because I've read it elsewhere. Maybe it was your research that I've read, written up in, popular form, but we did have a previous forum about whales and whale poop. The title of the forum that I gave it was Whales Do Poop. And apparently it's a good thing they do, because why? You tell me your story about what you know about whales and their poop.
Well, it's really important for the marine ecosystem. So whales are very large. They are the largest creatures that have ever lived on Earth. So the blue whale, for example, is larger than any dinosaur that lived. And they are so big, which means they have to eat a lot, which means they poop a lot. And it turns out their poop is really rich in nutrients that the ocean needs. And in particular, these tiny marine plants called phytoplankton that photosynthesize, just like trees and plants on land, they need to take in certain nutrients to grow and feed the rest of the marine food web. And so what my research and those of the research of others has found is that the nutrients in whale poop are really high. And essentially, when whales are releasing all of this poop at the surface, they are fertilizing the ocean and allowing phytoplankton to grow and basically rev up the rest of the marine food web, which makes the oceans overall healthy.
Absolutely wonderful. Now, as I understand it, they where do they get their food? One of the things that interests me is the fact that our oceans are becoming stratified, with the top layers warm, bottom layers still cold, but this differential can be problematic for a lot of reasons. And I read someplace that whales go up and down all the time, up and down, and keep stirring the water. Is that, do they go down to get food that's settled to the bottom? Is that what happens?
They dive to get their food, which includes a variety of fish. Some whales, like the sperm whale, eat squid and other things that we call cephalopods. And then some whales also eat krill. But you are absolutely correct. Whenever they dive, they are usually diving to get food, which is underneath the surface.
Mhm. Well, everybody has seen pictures of them coming to the surface and then flying for a second and flapping around and going back down. Well, I've often wondered, what's that all about? Why do they breach?
So breaching is a different behavior than feeding, and there's a lot of different reasons why a whale or a dolphin might breach. One is, as you mentioned, they fly through the air. It enables them to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time because water is about 800 times denser than air. And so it takes a lot of energy to move through the water as compared to the air. And so they can give themselves a little bit of an energetic break, so to speak, if they do a leap through the air instead of the water. Another reason is communication. There was a study off the coast of Australia that found that humpback whales, they had more surface active behavior or breaching behavior in poorer weather conditions. It was thought that that was a way to communicate to other whales nearby. So communication is a function. We also think it has a play function. For example, humpback whales, which I study here in Southeast Alaska, they are very aerially active. And for example, we were just out on the water on Saturday, 2 days ago here in Juneau, and we're watching one of our well-known female humpback whales. Her name is Tucker. She has a calf this year, and her calf was just leaping and breaching and spinning in the air, and it just seemed to be having so much fun. Interestingly, the calf, I think, was doing that while mom was down feeding. Because when the calves are young, they can't go down as deep and as long as their moms can. And so they're left at the surface. And I think that this calf was just having fun at the surface. So there's a variety of reasons why whales and dolphins might have this surface active behavior.
Well, now, if they can't dive deeply, how do they eat if most of the food is lower down?
So they're still nursing. And
I'd
humpback
forgotten
whales,
they're animal. Yes, they're mammals.
yeah,
Right.
right, right. And so
I'd
they will
forgotten.
nurse.
Oh, I never thought of whales as
Mhm.
nursing. I've never seen a picture of a whale nursing. Uh,
Oh,
what do, what, you know, I, I'm just trying to imagine. They
yeah.
have teats. They have
They
things like udders. Do they have like a cow's udder, or what do they have that a baby
yeah.
would want to get at?
Yeah, so female dolphins and whales have what are called mammary slits. And these are two slits on either side of her, what we call the urogenital opening. And so they're not like nipples, like you might think on a human, but they are two slits on either side of her reproductive opening towards her fluke, towards her tail. And so remember that big goal of whales and dolphins is to be as streamlined as possible. And so if they had external, say, breasts or nipples, that would create drag. And so what has been selected for through natural selection is for all of those reproductive parts to be inside. And so the calf will press its rostrum up against one of these mammary slits, and that stimulates. So imagine there is probably a nipple-like structure in there, and that stimulates the milk to be expressed from the mother. And there's some really amazing footage that came out a few years ago with researchers that have put camera tags on whales, and we have a fine scale look at exactly how that works. So basically, like if you can, and this is all happening underwater, so you can imagine the mom is horizontal in the water, being pretty still. And the whale, the baby will come up on either side of her back and then press up with its rostrum or the front of its head. And in this footage, you will actually see the water get a little bit cloudy. That's because there's some milk that, of course, gets into the whale's mouth, but some of that spills out as well. And the whale, the calf, baby whales are called calves. They will go from either side of the mom to get, nursing evenly on both sides of her. And then, this one nursing bout might take 20, 30 seconds, so it doesn't last that long, but the calves are doing it, of course, throughout the day and night.
Oh my goodness. So they don't load up and go several hours between feedings, is that right?
Well, I don't know that we have a really good indication of nursing rate, but my feeling is that the calf will nurse opportunistically whenever it can. Obviously when the mom's diving, that's not a good opportunity for the calf to try to nurse, but when she's up at the surface between dives, resting, that's probably a good moment for nursing to happen. And I
Uh-huh.
think and this is just my hunch, but I think that nursing is mostly calf driven. The calf is looking for cues from the mom and, so to speak, reading her behavior to see when it's a good moment to try to nurse. Because the mom otherwise is going to be going about her daily business. And remember that most whales, they fast for about half of the year. And
Oh,
so
really?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. hmm
Why?
Well, so we'll take the example here in Alaska where I study humpback whales. They come up here in the summer, so roughly late spring through early to mid fall to feed, and high latitudes are very, very productive. So the high latitudes can produce enough food through, I mentioned the phytoplankton, photosynthesizing and feeding the rest of the food chain. So there's a lot of food in these high latitude waters. And then during the winter time, most whales will migrate to low latitudes. And at low latitudes, there's typically much less food. Those low latitude waters, you mentioned the stratification in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Low latitude waters tend to be more stratified. There's just not as much nutrients, not as much what we call primary productivity or plant life. And so the whales are fasting during that time. And the reason, so you're probably asking, well, why the heck do they even leave the northern latitudes or the high latitudes anyway? Well, the reason we think is due to predation pressure. So the main predator of whales is killer whales.
Is what?
And the killer whale or orca, which I actually have on my wall
Really?
behind me. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we sort of have, I think most people feel kind of a look upon those lovely black and white critters as cute and adorable, like pandas or something. We have an affection for them, but it sounds like they are not nice.
Well, I think not nice is really a human
Yeah,
term. They have evolved to be the best animal that they can be. And the name killer whale comes from killers of whales was their original name, in a different language. And then it got translated because they will take down large whales. But there has never been a documented case of aggression or attack by killer whale on a human in the wild. So as
yeah, but there
humans,
have
we
been
have nothing
in
to fear.
one of these parks, some trainer or somebody who was supposed to be making the whale jump through hoops or something that really got her comeuppance, as I recall.
Right. I mean,
There are cases like that. Mm.
right. I mean, that was definitely a tragedy, and that woman did die. But that was a severe case of this animal, which never should have been in captivity. I mean, it probably had severe psychological damage and was not behaving like a normal killer whale. And it was very, very sad on multiple fronts with
Do
that.
you think that it's wrong to keep orcas or any other whales in captivity?
I do. I do. And the only reason that I can see it being justified is if an animal truly cannot be released back into the wild. Some facilities, they will have rehabilitation programs. These are mostly small whales, what we call dolphins or porpoise. And there are rescue programs that will rescue hurt and injured dolphins and whales and porpoise near shore, and then try to rehabilitate them. And if, in my opinion, if the choice for that animal is being kept in captivity because it simply cannot function as a wild animal anymore, or being euthanized, I think the better choice for that animal is to be kept in a very good captive environment that really looks after their welfare. But otherwise, and I can see no good justification for keeping any whale or dolphin or porpoise in captivity.
And I guess one of the questions then is how much do they feel? How much do they suffer? Are they, is it a real torture for them to be kept in captivity and trained to do stunts? Or do they have the kind of cognitive and emotional capacities that that would make that possible?
I think they do. And there's the research of others that there's very strong evidence that they do feel and they have emotions and they can suffer, as you said. And we know that they have some of the most complex brains on Earth. They
Mhm.
have a lot of cognitive capacity. There's certain cells in the brain that indicate feeling and empathy, and those things have been uncovered in the brains of
Mhm.
various dolphin species, mostly dolphins because they're the ones that we can most readily study. But some, like the humpback whale, for example, also has uh, these certain cells that indicate empathy or feeling. And so they're really smart, and you kind of think about humans as being really smart. Well, so are dolphins and whales. And in my opinion, I think the default should be that animals are smart and they do feel and they do understand, instead of the default sometimes I think being that they are lesser than us and they don't feel and they don't understand and they're not smart. I think if we had this shift in thinking that we were more equal, I think that would help a lot in animal welfare.
Well, my heart is with you because I've gone through I don't know, some sort of an awakening or something. I've had pets, cats and dogs, but I can't say that I really had a deep understanding of their wishes. Or I know other people, friends, one woman friend of mine who I think she and her dog really understand each other in a very complex level, which I never even tried to do. But and so I've always just assumed that animals were not mm, not anything like as smart as people. But I see that you study the comparison between the cognitive skills of primates and of dolphins. And that's what I really, when I found out that you were doing that, I thought, oh, you're just the person I want to talk to. Because I am in love with a monkey. There's a little monkey that I've been watching twice a day, at least, on YouTube, that lives in Vietnam and lives with a family and wears clothes and is way smarter than I thought any creature could be. So I've been watching this little guy for better part of a year now, because he was a tiny little guy when I first started watching him. And he does things that are uh, way more sophisticated and problem solving. You can see him trying to work out a solution to certain kinds of problems on his own. Sometimes he makes a mistake, but he he does very complicated planning and problem solving, and he has very intense relationships with people. I would say, you know, he's not 2 years old. And I watch him just because I'm so astounded that I wonder how much of this have they trained him to do? How much are they coaching him and rehearsing it? And how much is he really spontaneously figuring out? And even if they are really planning out the plot for the day, what he's going to do, like he'll get up and brush his teeth and go to the toilet and change his clothes and go cook breakfast for the whole family, that kind of thing. Yeah. Now, even if they taught him to do it and coach him along the way, you have to be awfully smart to do that. He's not 2 years old. You don't get a human 2-year-old who can get up and fix breakfast for the family, right? And I
Right.
have friends who are my age who are vegetables, to be honest. You know, they're way stupider than this little guy because, you know, infirmities of old age, or we lose our marbles. Tell me about it. How much, how you've made comparisons between, I guess, I don't know what primates you study besides people, but what, how do these people, and I think this little guy is a person, a real person requiring the kind of respect and dignity and affection and careful relationship that you would with a person. He just happens to be in a monkey's body, and otherwise he can't talk. And you see him trying to explain himself, and he can't. He'll go, if he wants potato for breakfast, he has to go get a potato and bring it and say, here, look, this is what I want. Now, how do they learn this? How much of that is a result of being brought up as a human child? And how does that compare with the cognitive skills of dolphins who absolutely can't be brought up as human children? So are the dolphins, how would you even test their IQ? So tell me about the comparison between dolphins and primates. And by the way, I assume that primates also differ from one species to another in how smart they are. Is that true?
That is true. And so if we look holistically at primates and what we'll just call whales, which includes, what we think of as big whales and then dolphins and porpoise, and primates, including humans, they are the two most cognitively complex, or what we say encephalized groups. We all
What
have
does
the
that
large.
mean? Encephalotized means they've got a good brain.
Right, right. It means, yeah, a lot of brain development, and sometimes that equates with a large absolute size as well. So we know that these two groups have evolved the largest, most complex brains on Earth. And when we talk about size, oftentimes we want to talk about relative size. So one measure of intelligence is looking at how big the brain is compared to the size of the body. And there is a special math equation you can look at, but the upshot is that if an animal has a larger than predicted brain for its body size, it means that it's using that brain to do things more complex than just the everyday things that the body needs to do. And that extra energy is going into thinking and this complex cognition. And so the reason why I started looking at this question is I just found it fascinating that these two groups, they have very different lives. They are separated by 95 million years of evolution. So it's not like they are closely related by any means, but they have both evolved these amazing brains.
What do you mean separated by that many years? One of them was way ahead of the other one, or what?
No, their last common ancestor that they shared was 95 million years ago. So if you think of the evolutionary tree, it's a branch where you have a common ancestor, and then through natural selection, and survival of the fittest, then you have species that branch off from common ancestors, and then it keeps branching off and off and off. And so if we look at that big evolutionary tree, the last time that primates and cetaceans had that they did have a common ancestor was 95 million years ago. And that was way before even the extinction of the dinosaurs, which was about 66 million years ago. So the
So
point is that
they were around when the dinosaurs were around.
their common ancestor was
Oh,
their
okay.
common
Okay.
ancestor.
What was it like? What kind of a critter was that?
Oh gosh, that is a good question. And I don't have a good answer for that.
Oh, you haven't ever seen it? You don't have a bones or anything to refer to, but you know that.
No.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay. All right. Did
Mhm.
it live? Do you know whether it lived in water or on land?
I presume it would have lived on land, but I can't be certain because whales originally evolved on land and then
Really?
they moved to the sea.
Really?
Hmm. Hmm.
I learned something every 30 seconds now from you. That's wonderful. Whales originated on land. Is that related to why they're mammals?
Yes. Yes. Hmm. Hmm.
Are there any other mammals that evolved in the ocean that live in the ocean?
No. So all of the marine mammals had a land ancestor and then found their way, so to speak, to the ocean. So that includes pinnipeds, so seals and sea lions and walrus. Um, they had land ancestors. I'm hesitating a little bit because I'm thinking of the Cerinians, but no, I do believe they had a land-based ancestor as well. We're talking 50, 60 million years ago.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So, but now, okay, tell me now, you've been studying and among the marine animals, are the dolphins smarter than whales, say, and are there different species of whales that some are smarter than others and so on, or how does that work? And how do you know anyway?
Yeah, and it's a really complex question, but there are ways to measure it. But we need to remember that it's also really hard just to measure intelligence in our own species and humans. That's still really tricky. So imagine trying to measure it in a non-human. So if we look at comparing dolphins to primates, evidence shows if we just look at their brain size and anatomy, that dolphins actually are are smarter. And when we're talking about primates here, we're talking about the great apes. So these are the gorillas and chimpanzees, orangutans, and bonobos, which used to be called the pygmy chimpanzee. So the great apes have the most complex brain of any primate other than humans. And then we have the dolphins have brain.
But the great apes, let's stay with the primates.
Mhm, mhm.
The big the big ones are smarter than the little monkeys.
Yes, if we are basing it on some standard metrics, which is relative brain size
Mhm.
and the anatomical complexity of the brain, yes, the great apes are quote unquote smarter than monkeys, which are a different type of primate.
I am very surprised. Uh, Although I guess I shouldn't be, because remember, not 20 years ago, there was a gorilla named Coco or something who learned sign language.
Yes.
And I think I'd be really interested in seeing people do that more with other primates, because I wonder how much you can get into their inner experiences, how much they can share about what they think about life and death and, whatever, relationships and so on. But this Coco seemed to have quite a bit of inner awareness and maybe reflectiveness. I don't know. I mean, you probably could, I'm sure you can tell me more than I can recall from that case. But I wish they would try again with some other animals and with my little Vietnamese monkey in particular, because I know that that guy has real ideas and is so frustrated because he can't speak,
Hmm.
and can't share. But he clearly could has things to tell us if he had words.
Right. And remember that other animals might have language. It's just different than human language. And so they do communicate with each other very well and very efficiently. Um, but it's not through words like we as humans have.
But
They have
yes, but
different.
I heard he squeaks. He makes a screaming kind of high pitched noise.
Mhm.
And and sometimes the people producing the show, when he screams, they'll say, "Dad," they'll print there that he's calling Dad. Well, I don't know whether they can tell from the sound or they just made that up. I mean, can they tell from the vocalization that he means certain things and not other things? He's not calling, "I want potatoes for breakfast." He's saying, "Dad, I want to go swimming," or something. Can they figure out that there's anything equivalent to speech in those noises that they're making?
I think so. And I'm not as up on the primate literature with language, but I do know in some whales, scientists have discovered indications of language. And one example is the sperm whale. It's the largest toothed whale. And sperm whales also have the largest brain to ever exist on Earth. And sperm whales communicate through this series of complex clicks. So think of Morse code. We used to communicate with just clicks and taps. That's essentially what the sperm whales are emitting. And the people that have been studying sperm whales for decades are now uncovering that they think that the system of clicks that the sperm whales emit is the closest we have to human language in another species.
Mhm.
Um, and but it's very, very different than human language. It is atonal, meaning it's just like a click or a tap. There's no fluctuation. It's not a whistle or a song. It's just these clicks. But so we're beginning to understand that these sperm whales have this complex, possibly language where they might be saying specific things to one another. I was just reading an article about elephants, how through their rumbles, they might actually have different ways to call out to other specific elephants. And so I think the more we study any animal, the more we are discovering about their capability for communication and maybe even language. I think a lot of work has been done with primates because we are so similar to them, and they have hands, and it makes it easier to understand at least some gestures. And of course, they're terrestrial animals, so it's really hard when you're trying to uncover this in something that lives under the sea. But I think we're making a lot of progress as a scientific body in understanding it.
Well, I mean, of course, it's hard to do when they're in the sea because you don't have any normal interactions, so it's hard to build up a common topic of conversation of things that both sides are interested in. But I'm amazed. Just recently, been I don't want to rain on your parade because you've got a special interest in primates and dolphins, but tell me about trees. you know,
Oh, yeah.
hearing that now, the roots of trees, and even they emit things in the air that they communicate in a way. And apparently, if thing I most recently saw, there was some locust infestation or some other bugs that were coming, and they just about wiped up out certain batch of trees. But when they got to the next trees that were a little farther away, they couldn't do it. These insects couldn't do it because the first bunch of trees had sent messages. I don't know whether to believe this, but sent messages through their roots that there's something coming, be ready. And the other trees got their act together and prepared some poison or something that did in the beetles or whatever, And so they were able to survive because of the warning that they received from the first bunch of trees. Now, look, I don't know, I don't know whether to believe things like that, but what do you believe?
I believe that we are continually surprised by science, and that's the exciting part about being a scientist is you get to dig in and discover new things. And I have read a little bit about those examples of communication in trees and plants. And I know someone that I admire very much, Jane Goodall. I recently read something that I know she had been looking into some of that as well. And so I think there's some good data to show that that's happening. And that admittedly is a bit out of my area of expertise, but I love hearing about it and I always have an open mind.
Well, it makes me think, really, I am part of nature. I'm just one more critter that, all these guys have their own lives to live and their own aspirations and their own skills and knowledge and so on. And it sort of makes me into a pantheist, God is everywhere,
Yes.
something like
Mhm.
that. So I think that's why I'm so fascinated with my monkey. And I would love to be able to get a real relationship with the dolphin. I don't know about whales. I mean, it must be really hard to make friends with a whale. I mean, have you ever really developed you know, a bond with a whale?
No, my research has always been very one-sided. I tend to know a lot about the species and individuals that I study, but they don't know anything about me, and that is just fine. I don't really desire to be a part of their lives. I just want to understand them, learn about them, be open to what they can teach me, and then use all of that to help protect them. And I have not been in the water with my study species. That's just never been part of my research program.
Okay, I'm sort of disappointed. But I shouldn't be surprised because I did read that one of your concerns is learning how to keep tourists out of the way so that the whales can have private lives or something like that. Tell me about that. What are you
Mm.
doing along those lines?
Yeah, so that's a project that I've been doing here in Juneau since 2020, and we started it during the pandemic, summer of 2020, when we had very little vessel traffic here. So just to back up a little bit, Juneau is a beautiful place to live, and a lot of people visit us during the summer on cruise ships. And we have about 1.6 million cruise ship passengers that visit our small town of about 30,000 people each summer, and it seems to be increasing each year. And many people go on whale watch trips when they come to Juneau. About a quarter of cruise ship passengers, it's estimated, go on a whale watch trip when they are in town. And it's understandable people want to see the humpback whales. They are one of the most aerially active, as I mentioned, whales to watch. And you can see a humpback whale literally from the shores of Juneau or a short 5-minute boat trip. But my concern is that the level of boat traffic is increasing each year as the number of cruise ship passengers increases, and what impact does this have on the humpback whales? And so in 2020, when we didn't have any cruise ships and therefore much less boat traffic on the water, I started working with some colleagues at NOAA and University of Alaska Fairbanks to look at what impact this might have on the health of the whales in terms of their stress.
And
And so we started that study in 2020, and then we're still doing it this summer, but kind of the initial bookend to the first part of the study was last summer. So we had 4 years of data, and I'll tell you, we are still analyzing them and they are not ready to be shared publicly, but we have a really cool research design where we had a natural difference in vessel traffic between the 4 years. So 2020, essentially no vessel traffic, and then 2021, a little bit more, but we were still really in the pandemic then. So we still had very few cruise ships in town. And then 2022, everything opened back up again. It was really busy here. And then 2023 was the busiest ever in Juneau for cruise ships, and then that is linked to vessel traffic. So the reason why we're concerned about vessel traffic is noise. Whales, their dominant sense is hearing, and boats are noisy. And so there's this noise pollution that we think could impact a whale's health. There's also just increased risk of collision with vessels when there are a lot of vessels on the water. And remember, these whales are up here feeding. This is their time of the year to eat as much as they can, to put on all the fat or blubber stores so they can make it through the rest of the year when they are fasting. And so we're looking at our 4 years of data now, and I'm fortunate to have colleagues at NOAA who are part of the team. And so our results can directly feed into management if it warrants it.
so how do you tell whether the animal is stressed?
We take biopsy samples, and we have a crossbow that we use to fire a dart to the animal. And the crossbow, it inserts into the animal about an inch long or so, and takes a tiny core that's about the size of a pencil eraser, takes a tiny core of skin and blubber from the animal, and then we collect the sample and analyze it in the lab. And I hope you're okay. I can keep talking if you need me to. Oh, Meta, I think you are still muted.
Yeah, I will cut out what I can of this noise I'm making, but there's a lot of pollen around here, so I don't normally have a terrible cough, but lately it's not fun. Anyway, I'll cut this out, when I edit it.
Sure.
So now you do some investigation of the content of the blubber from hormones or something that you get in if they're stressed, is that it?
Right. So whales, like humans, they have a stress hormone called cortisol, and they have another closely related stress hormone called corticosterone. And these hormones, they circulate throughout the body, and then they are deposited or they build up in the blubber layer. And so if we take a small sample of their blubber, we can measure the concentration of that stress hormone in their body. And we're also looking at reproductive hormones, so progesterone and testosterone. And we're also getting some really interesting information on reproduction and pregnancy in these humpback whales as well.
Is there any reason to think that it's interrupted or made problematic, reproduction, if they're stressed?
There could be a link, and again, we're still analyzing that. But one of the one of the reasons for looking at those reproductive hormones is that they can influence the stress. So we're trying to control for any other factors that might be affecting the stress level. But then also, it's just been really fun for us as a team to look at the progesterone levels in
Mhm.
females, because if a female is pregnant, as in humans, the progesterone is really high.
Mhm.
And so we know in late fall, usually when the lab has analyzed the blubber samples, we know who's pregnant. And then we're
Oh.
anxiously waiting for those females to come back the following summer and to see if she has a calf or not.
So
So that's been a really fun.
where do they give birth? Not there, huh?
No, they give birth on the breeding grounds. And so the humpback whales here, most of them go to Hawaii, but some of them, about 10%, go to Mexico.
Okay. And how long is a pregnancy?
It's a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so you don't try to make friends with your whales. That's too bad. Does anybody, I know you wouldn't approve, but or I gather you wouldn't approve, but does anybody try to form a relationship with a whale and or any whales and communicate with them and see if you can develop some understanding of each other? It's so much. If you say that a primate or monkeys and gorillas and so on have uh, about the same IQ as a dolphin, well, monkeys, if you raise them in towns, they have access to a lot of culture. And what's the equivalent? There's nothing like a library under the water for these marine animals. So what is their worldview like? How do they form uh,
Mhm.
ideas? Do they have what you call ideas or abstractions? Does anybody have any clue about what their relationships or their mental world is like for them experientially?
Mhm. Well, they live in a very complex environment, actually. So in living in the ocean inherently, it's a 3D environment. Because they're living in this vast space, and they travel vast distances. So the humpback whales I just mentioned, they are traveling 3 to 5,000 miles down to their breeding grounds and then back again. So they are traveling a lot and experiencing a lot of different parts of the ocean. Um, they have to travel in search of food and in search of mates. In the case of females with calves, they have to go to places that are going to be safe from predators. So there definitely is a lot for them to process and to respond to and to think about. And I do know, again, just based on my humpback whale survey that I did on Saturday, they do have fun with their environment. So we saw two whales, humpback whales, in our survey. They were resting in a kelp bed and they had some of the kelp wrapped around them. So they were using the kelp as sort of, I think, a natural toy or plaything. So I think they do have fun with natural things in their environment. And they are going both, in a horizontal movement, but they're going up and down. And the sperm whale is one of the most extreme divers. They can dive down to almost 2 miles if they want to. And as you mentioned at the start of our chat here, the ocean is stratified. So it's going to get very cold. It also becomes very dark. And so they're engaging different senses. So I think it's a very stimulating environment for them. There's a lot to process. And the other thing which really excites me about studying primates and whales and dolphins is they are very social for the most part. So they are forming in many species complex long-term bonds with one another, friendships, if you want to call it that. And these groups are always changing in size and who's in the group. And it's just like humans, actually. It's
Mhm,
called
mhm.
fission fusion. These groups are not static and they are changing throughout the day. So there's a lot to keep track of in terms of, who's in my group, who's my friend, who's my enemy. What am I going to do with this individual? Kind of like humans. So they definitely have a lot of environmental stimuli and then social stimuli as well.
Well, do they travel and live in, clusters like a community? Or would you say they're mostly loners who every now and then meet another uh, whale from a different area that they haven't ever met before and they wave and say, hi, good to meet you? Do they, how much is it a a settlement kind of thing where they travel together and know each other?
It varies by species. So the killer whale is one of the most social species, and the resident type of killer whale, they live in permanent family groups. So a son or a daughter will never leave its mother. And they have these matriarchal societies led by an elder female. And so a pod of killer whales is actually a family unit of a female and her descendants. And you can have 4 generations of individuals in a killer whale pod that are all closely related. But that is not the norm, but it is a really neat example. Other species of dolphins don't necessarily live in family groups, but they definitely have preferred dolphins that they are with more than others, but still it's very fluid. The group that a dolphin is with at night is likely going to be different than the group it was with during the daytime in the morning. And then the other extreme, we have many of the large whales do tend to be more solitary. The humpback whale is actually the exception. They tend to be one of the most social large whales. But some of the other large whales, like blue whales, the thinking is that they are less social because they're just so big and they need to eat a lot, and to reduce competition, they spread out more and aren't in these large groups.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about family, but is it like anything like a nuclear human family with mama, dad, and grandma and
Mhm.
the babies?
It is, except for the dad. So
Oh,
in
where did dad go?
most,
After he
yeah,
mates, he goes away.
exactly. Yeah. I don't know of any example in whales and dolphins where the male provides care. So
What is
the
he off on his own, or does he hang out with the guys?
well, the males are in their so if we take the killer whale example, that male is within his own family group. And then how resident killer whales, their mating strategy is that they will come together at a higher level in these larger groups. And then, males will go between different groups to mate. And it's also interesting that in most whales and dolphins, the males and the females are both mating multiple times during a breeding season, and they are not forming any long-term pair bonds with each other. It's more of quick opportunistic matings that occur.
One night stands.
Yes, exactly. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's discouraging. I was kind of looking forward to the idea of a
Oh,
family unit, but if it's all matrilineal and or matriarchal, you said that it's kind of
yep.
it's a
Mhm.
dominant female with all her younger. Okay, okay, well, to each his own. I think I would.
Right, right.
Now you talked about the dangers of exposure to sound, and I'd heard about that there's a concern about not just the loudness of ships, but also uh, military things that go on where they test explosions and things underwater that travel for 1,000 miles or something and really harm. I think the loudness can really do physical damage, as I understand it. Maybe you can brief me on that. But
Mhm.
so I would be interested in knowing what needs to be done to protect them from noise. But more than that, also, ships bump into these little guys or big guys. And we every now and then hear about how many more whales have been found, on the the bow of a ship tangled up where it's, they bumped into them and killed them. What can be done to protect whales from ships?
Yeah, and that's an issue that I am very interested in and trying to work on a little bit with my research. And so noise pollution is is damaging. And as I mentioned before, whales and dolphins, their hearing is their dominant sense. Us, it's our eyes, but for them, it's their hearing. Their ears are very sensitive. And as you mentioned, there have been cases where military sonar activity has led to the death of some certain whale species. One of the best documented linkages comes from beaked whales in the Caribbean. That there was several, I think there was a group of 8 or 10 that washed up dead, and around the same time that there was military activity going on. And at least one of those cases has made it all the way to the Supreme Court. So I know that it is something that can be very deadly, but there is hopefully some progress being made. For example, to not do that high intensity sonar activity in areas where there are known whales around.
Mhm.
And then I know there's other measures in terms of ship noise. Decreasing the speed can make ships less noisy. And also that, of course, helps to minimize risk of collision with a ship. And I know in certain places along the US East Coast and even up into Canada, there are some zones where ships are, it's either encouraged or required. I don't remember, to slow down in times where there are migrating right whales, North Atlantic right whales. And then on the West Coast off California, again, in times of years when there are migrating whales along the coast, there are reduced speeds encouraged by ships. So that can help, but we still have a long ways to go. And I have heard about some technology to make ships quieter. I think if we could reduce the noise that the engines make, it would go a long way. And I think there is some technology on the horizon to make ships quieter. And then also having these so-called safe zones for whales in areas, particularly along the coast near shipping channels where there's a lot of big vessels moving in and out, that can help.
Well, of the two, which is more serious, in the life of a whale, the noise or the possibility of being run down by a ship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the noise is more of a chronic problem. And again, if we take a human example, if someone lives near the airport or near some train tracks, it's going to be really annoying, could disrupt sleep, could have to talk at a louder volume to be heard, and all that can affect stress. So that's what we call more of a chronic issue.
Mhm.
It usually won't lead to death, except in those extreme cases, like you mentioned, with the military sonar activity. But ship strike, I mean, definitely can be lethal to a whale. And if it's not lethal, it can cause pretty grave injuries. So I think the ship strikes is more of an acute
Mhm.
stressor, acute event, or acute threat, I should say. And the pollution, the acoustic pollution, is more of a chronic event.
Mhm. Okay, now this whole conversation was supposed to be about whales and global warming.
Oh,
That these lovely animals have some influence on our own problem of climate change. So we didn't really cover that, but let's at least address it again. What is your take on that issue?
well, we are starting to understand the role of whales in nutrient and carbon cycling. So at the beginning of our talk, you asked about whale poop, and I mentioned how their poop can fertilize the ocean and help to create, healthier
Mhm.
oceans through increased productivity. So that's in itself really important, revving up the oceanic food chain. The other thing that is more complex, and we are trying harder to understand that, is what impact can this have on the carbon cycle in terms of causing carbon sequestration. So getting carbon from the atmosphere down to the deep sea, where it can be removed from the atmosphere for 100 years or more. And one way that we know whales do this, we're pretty certain of this, is through their massive bodies. When they sink, they form what are called whale falls. And these huge carcasses sink to the deep sea, and whales are composed of carbon naturally, just like you and I are, just like any living thing. And so all of that carbon that they have amassed during their long lives in these big bodies can sink to the deep sea and essentially be trapped there for hundreds to even thousands of years. So we know that that pathway happens, but overall, it's a very small impact on the global carbon cycle. The other avenue that we're starting to look at further is this avenue of what happens to that carbon that is taken out of the atmosphere by the phytoplankton that whales cause to grow. And so there's all these linkages. So you have the whale poop with the nutrients that causes the phytoplankton to grow. So these phytoplankton are sucking up CO2. So the question is, where does that, what we call whale-mediated carbon, go? Does it just enter the food web and become cycled around in the food web, or is it extra carbon captured by phytoplankton that otherwise they wouldn't have, that can then sink to the deep sea? But all of that is still only going to be a pretty small impact on the global carbon cycle.
Mhm.
But in my opinion, every bit matters, but we shouldn't expect whales to do the job for us in terms of solving climate change, but it's just another reason to protect them. You know, they have all these amazing abilities we've been talking about the past hour, and they create healthy ecosystems. Perhaps they can also add to some carbon sequestration too. So it's all part of the whole package of why we should, in my opinion, continue to conserve whales.
Mhm. Wow. Okay. It's really inspiring to talk to you. What fun. I wish I could change careers and become a whale watcher scientist. That's that sounds like a great career. So thank you for what you're doing and
Yep.
for informing me about all of these things that I've always wondered about. So I'll keep following some of your publications occasionally, so I can see what you continue to be involved with. Okay.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate the
Thank you.
opportunity. Thanks for your great questions and interest.
I just loved every minute of it. Thank you.